Really awesome data, one of the best you've ever had in your entire life. For you folks, and so today I'm doing my top 10. Typically on Fridays I started off doing top 10 Cthulhu Mythos stories, and then I slid in to other things out there too, like top 10 movies, top 10 in science fiction or something like that too. And then I came back around and I did my top 10 of these things out there too, like novels, short stories. Last week I did my top 10 Lovecraft shorts, my top 10 game books was recently published too, and then my top 10 authors, right, and that sort of a thing too. So I think you'll enjoy that too. So today I thought let's push this up a notch. Let's do my top 10 non-Lovecraft Cthulhu Mythos stories. So the Cthulhu Mythos was created in what I call Generation 1, which is what the first one was, the top Generation 1 stuff, in a pulp era. And when Lovecraft died in 37, and I consider Generation 1, 10, and 40. For you folks, while he was still alive, he wrote and created and popularized this shared universe called the Cthulhu Mythos today. But basically what's happening here is that we have a lot of people there at the time, right? He would bring in other people as authors. And then he would ask, he encouraged these co-writers that he was very prolific with at the time, like Carcassion Smith, Robert E. Howard, those sorts of folks too, to write and to share it too. And so even then, right, it was a huge shared universe and that sort of a thing too. But he created it, was probably considered the larger person during that era, right? So I think he had like maybe 5 or 6 on my first one in this era. And then after he died in Generations 2 and 3 that were run by Arkham House with August Derleth and Carter being 1 and 2. And then I consider Generation 4 to begin in 1980 with Ramsey Campbell's release of New Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos. And that runs through today. So all of those things that have been written during these 4 years would be a part of this. Now, I do consider something called Generation 0 as part of the Cthulhu Mythos, the things that were either incorporated into it from pre-Lovecraft or just key emphasis on it and that sort of a thing too. But I'm not concluding, just as a heads up, none of those today. All right, so let's get started with this thing. These are all my faves for you folks. I don't think the old man would mind me looking at the other stuff. All right, so number 10 is The Black Stone by Robert E. Howard from 31. This is an absolute classic. It was a strong short story then, and that sort of a thing too. It's a very strong cosmic horror style, just like this. Most of the Lovecraft stuff is too, although he did write some fantasy stuff on Dreamlands, and you will see some fantasy things in here too. But typically, this is a great cosmic horror and embracing of the mythos and the Black Stone. It's added in the central. It's added in Eastern Europe and that sort of a thing too. When some folks are going out there for a tour, love it lots. Classic. Number 9 is The Tale, and I'm probably going to slaughter this up. Satampra. Zeiros, and I hope I pronounced that right. And that's by Clark Smith. I think it's like the same month in the same year. That sort of a thing too. And 31. For your folks, and all that introduces the character of Sabagua. He shares that around with other folks, and Lovecraft actually says that's great. And he actually he's actually ghostwriting a novel called The Mound, and so he'll actually incorporate it and make some changes to it. And that sort of a thing too, and then others did that too, but it just wasn't able to get published. And so I think the first one was actually by Robert E. Howard to get that published because of delays with them with this short story. But this is a fun little short story. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's more of a fantasy battle of odds. And so number 9, The Tale of Satampra, Zeiros by CAS. Number 8, another a classic to my mind. It's one of my favorite in the 3rd and 4th generations, rather. It's also one in the first collection, too. And this is T.E.D. Klein's Black Man with a Horn for you, folks. It's an absolute classic. So basically, what he is doing in this, and the opening is just one of my favorite openings ever in any horror short story, in any story, love a lot. But basically, what's happening here is that the central conceit of what's happening is that this person seems like he might be Frank Belknap, who was a person who was living at the time of the Cthulhu Mythos being written, wasn't considered an apprentice by Lovecraft, but many people today sort of consider him that, and that sort of a thing too. He's living in New York City as an older man, and that sort of a thing too. And then he believed that all the things that he was told were just, some great stuff. Then he's coming back on the way home from a plane. He meets a missionary, and that sort of a thing too. Coming back from a convention where he was in appearance, and then he talks about some stuff that the missionary ran into in Southeast Asia, and it seems like that's actually something that Lovecraft mentioned in one of his short stories. And he does a little bit of research and finds out that this stuff actually happened. Right? And that's sort of so that's number 8, Black Man with a Horn by T.E.D. Klein from 80. Number 7 is Cold Print by Ramsey Campbell. This is from 85. I feel like this is the best for Ramsey Campbell. Ramsey Campbell grew up a big fan of the Cthulhu Mythos. And he actually was writing short stories and getting it published while he was still a teenager. And that sort of a thing, too, for Arkham House with August Earl, and that sort of a thing, too. Cold Print, I think, is his best Cthulhu Mythos short story from the mid-'80s. I think it's an absolute classic. But basically what's happening here is that we have a person who's a big bibliophile. He loves older stuff. And that sort of a thing too, and while tracking down some books and that sort of a thing too, he goes to a CD place in the cities that's in a section of the UK that was created by Ramsey Campbell as his personal place, kind of like Lovecraft did with the Arkham area too, and Miskatonic University, Innsmouth, and that sort of a thing too. And then he comes across an innkeeper, the shopkeeper, and then that sends him down to some dark places. And the characteristics of this character, what happens, what he runs into is great. Love it lots, and it's very, very dark and very, very grisly. I love the idea of somebody with eyes in his hands and that sort of a thing too. All right, so that's great stuff. Now, number 6 is The Hounds of Tindalos by Frank Belknap from 29. So I thought that this was the first short story written by somebody that wasn't Lovecraft in the Cthulhu Mythos, and then I looked it up on my AI to see just before I started recording this, and it said no, he wasn't, but he was the first. The same answers. It was weird how that I heard it. To my query was, is this the first short story by a non-Lovecraft? And it said, no, it's not the first short story by Lovecraft. There were other, but he was the first one that was published by somebody who wasn't Lovecraft. It was just a different language. I'm not sure, but I like it lots. I think it's great stuff. The ideas here are central, great. I love the ending too. But this conceit of these hounds that hunt, through time and space, and need certain angles to hunt through, and that sort of a thing too. I think it's classic stuff. All right, number 5. Top 5 done. Number 5 is The Fires of Ash. I'm sure I'm going to slaughter this name. It should be showing. I'm sorry, it's The Fires, just singular. Of Asshurbanipul by Robert E. Howard. This is more of a sword and sorcery take. It's from 36. Love it lots. And so basically what's happening here, and this is more in the Middle East. We have some folks that are escaping from bandits, and they run into this ruins of the city that they've come across out there in the ancient deserts of Arabia. And then they encounter, while they are there, some darker stuff that happens, and that's where and that sort of thing too. And then the bandits will get their bad thing, and these two people will escape and get their come up. It's on the mountains. Classic level. Now, that one being on my top 10 probably wouldn't be surprised with being ahead of Blackstone. I mean, many people really just love the Blackstone. I do. It is on my top 10. But just as a heads up. But number 4 one might surprise some folks. But I just love it so much. I think this is a hidden classic of the Cthulhu Mythos, and that is The Tree Men of Emba by Donald Wandrei from 32. Donald Wandrei was one of the co-founders of Arkham House with August Earl and other stuff too, but he was more on the business side of things and that sort of thing too. There's a few short stories that are written in the Cthulhu Mythos too, that sort of a thing too. But I think this one should not be forgotten, because this is sort of the introduction of body horror into the Cthulhu Mythos, right? And that sort of a thing too. But basically what's happening here is that we have an expedition from some folks in the Western civilization to Africa, and they come into a trading post, and they come across a guy who tries to tell them not to do it, and that sort of a thing too. And they say, but I'm here. And it's like a Cthulhu Mythos sounding ruins, and that sort of a thing too. But they're like, I'm here, and that sort of a thing too. And so he tells them, I did it. Here's my story. And so that's his story, and that sort of a thing too. This ending is an absolute classic level lots, and it's strong stuff. And that sort of a thing too. I think it's great stuff, and it winds up being body horror with that ending level lots. And I think it's an absolute classic to my mind, and that sort of a thing too. And probably I forgot. I wanted to check it out. Number 3 is A Study in Emerald by Neil Gaiman. This is one they were back into the modern era. Fourth Generation is also one of the only ones from this century, 22 years ago. By Neil Gaiman, A Study in Emerald. This is the first short story that was published in a collection that I picked up that sort of combines the Cthulhu Mythos with the Sherlock Holmes tales and that sort of a thing too. This one, the Hugo, it's an absolute classic. The ending, it's a 10 out of 10. Love it lots. Now, I know some people out there might be like, why isn't Neil Gaiman short story in your top 10? I hear you. And that sort of thing. If you don't want to read it, that's fine too. I know that at the time when I was reviewing it for this channel, it was free online. You can definitely check it. He would put it on his website and that sort of a thing too. So if it's still free online, that's like 7 or 8 years ago. But you can check it out too, just see. There you go. But so that way, if you don't want to spend money on it or anything, I get it. I hear you. That sort of a thing too. But I feel like the works should be the works, right? And that works is a total classic. And it won the Hugo, deservedly. And the next, number 2, is also winning Hugo. This is a novella it's by Roger Zelazny. This is his 24 Views of Mount Fuji by Hokusai. And that sort of a thing too. It's from 1985. It also won the Hugo for the best novella that year. It's strong stuff. It's basically what he's doing here. He's turning the Cthulhu Mythos into a little bit more of a cyberpunk take on what's happening, and that sort of a thing too. It's an absolute classic. Love it lots. It's my favorite modern short story from this era too, and such. And so Roger Zelazny, if you recall, was somebody who definitely enjoyed adding in various writing in different mythologies, right, and that sort of a thing too. Whether it was in the Hindu mythology or with this or Rose for Ecclesiastes and writing that sort of thing too. So he enjoyed sort of writing in different mythology, or even an Egyptian one too, and that sort of a thing too. So I think you'll really enjoy what's happening here and really sort of embrace it too. Love it lots. And it's such a strong stuff. And then the last one is from the First Generation, and this is Clark Ashton Smith, The Seven Geases for you folks. It's also my favorite fantasy short story too. And this is 1993. I'm sorry, I didn't say 93. Sorry about that. It's probably 33. I must have mistyped that in there. I was like, that's weird. All right, but yeah, it's The Seven Geases. It's an absolute classic. Love it. It's lots of heavily influenced Dungeons and Dragons. Its ending did get probably a little pushback then, and even some reviewers today that I've seen come across. But I couldn't imagine a different ending, right? And that's sort of a thing to absolute classic. Love it lots. And that's sort of a thing too. And so that's The Seven Geases. All right, so let's take a quick look at my top 10 once more for you folks. Number 10 is The Black Stone by Robert E. Howard. Number 9 is The Tale of the Satampra, Zeiros by Clark Ashton Smith. Number 8 is The Black Man with a Horn by T.E.D. Klein. Number 7 is Cold Print by Ramsey, Campbell. Number 6 is The Hounds of Tindalos by Belknap. Number 5 is The Fire of Asshurbanipul by Robert E. Howard. Number 4 is The Treemen of Amboise by Donald Wandrei. Number 3 is A Study in Emerald by Neil Gaiman. Number 24, I'm sorry, 24. Number 2 is 24 Views of Mount Fuji by Hokusai by Roger Zelazny. And number 1 is The Seven Geases by Clark Ashton Smith. For you folks. All right, and there you go. I hope you enjoyed that so very, very much for you folks. I know, number 5, The Fire, and number 4, The Tree may not be considered, but a lot of Cthulhu Mythos, folks, is the classics like I do. But yeah, I'm sure, right, once you read them or seen them in that light, you'll definitely appreciate them too. Alrighty, for you folks, and I hope you really enjoyed it too, right? So I hope you right and that sort of a thing too. So there you are. Have you read these? What did you think about them? Would you put them in this order? What are your top 10 non-Lovecraft Cthulhu Mythos stuff, and how he welcomed their influence, and so forth? And then I'm happy to sort of engage you with it. Also, as a reminder, just a heads up, I'm not a trained critic. Right? I didn't study English in college except for a random creative writing course. I don't write, creatively. I don't edit. And that sort of a thing too either, right? And so that means I'm just a fan, right? I'm not coming to you from a place of expertise. So I'm just a fan, right? And somebody who really loves this stuff. I probably read at least 1,000 short stories in the Cthulhu Mythos after I encountered Lovecraft as a junior college. So you can definitely check it out too for you folks. But just let me know what your thoughts are too. It's from fan to fan for you folks. Alrighty, there you are. I also do 3 of these reviews of the things that are in these older eras, like that sort of a thing too, in fantasy, science fiction, and horror too. So you can check out those things. I'm currently reading and knocking out Brian Lemney stuff for my October, who's also in the Cthulhu Mythos too, wrote and that's his novel, collection of his that collects all of his Cthulhu Mythos stuff too. And then also I do on Wednesday older video game reviews, and then you check that out too. Also, that sort of a thing too. So we'll hopefully keep that stuff out for you folks. I also sometimes will do some tabletop RPG reviews from Dungeons and Dragons or games like Battletech 2 on Monday. So check out all of that stuff for you folks. And then if some of that stuff actually sounds like your cup of tea, and no pressure, then great. Welcome to the channel. Have a seat. And please, while you're here, do all the YouTube stuff too. Like hit the sub button, all share, bell, all that stuff too. Alrighty, as you can tell from these 7 older things, that definitely is the passion right of this channel, is to find these things for you, right? And unpack them for you too. Alright, it's even worse title comes from too. That's the worst thing about new books, right? That's a quote by a French philosopher, Jacques Joubert, who says that the worst thing about them was that they actually kept us from reading the old stuff, right? Not that the new stuff is bad by default, it's not, right? I would never go into that place. But our passion for these new diversions, right, and that sort of a thing too, and whether we're reading, playing them on video games, watching them in movies, and that sort of a thing too, right, we have sometimes forgotten that these things are standing on the shoulders of giants. So let's check out those giants too while we're doing it too, right? And that's right from the Cthulhu Mythos stuff like Ashton Smith, Robert Howard, Lovecraft, and all the way to modern stuff too. So let's check out those classics and then have a greater appreciation for them too, right? And then if you made it all the way here to the end of my video, I just wanted to thank you, so very, very much for just taking some time out of your day and investing it, right? And even watching my videos, because we all have so many things, right, that are happening in our lives. And we're even pulled in so many different directions too. So if I you spend this time with me, that's incredibly humbling. And I appreciate it so very, very much. So thanks again and have an amazing day.